welcome to the Pali Threads podcast. This is Khalid Sasa, and I'm incredibly honored to have Canadian journalist, activist, author, icon, Yves Engler. And I'm just going to briefly introduce you, but I already did, but you have 13 books published, Vancouver born, BC Junior League hockey player, which is incredible. And I was reading about how you tie that to your activism and your journey. You use analogies from that in terms of being an agitator, which I love. And yeah, I'd love for you actually, if you could briefly introduce yourself, talk about your journey to coming to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm 46. I've been active in progressive movements, mostly here in Jojage, Montreal, for 25, a little bit over 25 years. And like you said, I for the first 19 years of my life, or most of those years, playing high level hockey was a kind of priority of mine. I'm pretty far removed from that now, but I basically, when I moved to Montreal to go to university, I was already politicized. I was already organizing in the sort of anti-corporate globalization movement, and there was the big Free Trade Area of the Americas Summit in Quebec City in April of 2001. But I basically got into University Concordia that had the most active campuses and had certainly the most active Palestine solidarity movement in the country, and almost certainly in North America. And I ended up in the student union, elected vice president of the Concordia Student Union when Netanyahu, they tried to have Netanyahu speak. He was then, of course, the former prime minister. He was a prime minister in the late 90s. And it was a clear provocation, or as some of the Israel lobby people put it at the time, to have him speak in the viper's nest. That's what they refer to Concordia as, viper's nest of Palestine solidarity, and that's where Solidarity for Palestine Human Rights began, and then spread to many other campuses in subsequent years. And I'll be honest, at this point. By the time of Netanyahu, I did have some understanding about Palestine, but that wasn't really what got me politicized. That's not where I sort of came from, if you like, politically. It was more on sort of like corporate power, capitalist globalization, stuff like that. And basically, this Netanyahu event, completely exploded. He was not able to speak. The police fired pepper spray, maybe tear gas inside the university building. Windows were broken. There was a supposed riot. It led to like a whole year of turmoil in the student union. The university tried to ban all kinds of political activity and stuff. I got arrested. I got on and on and on. And so that really politicized me. A couple years later, I did a history of Haiti course in my first year at Concordia, and I saw that there was the sort of a destabilization campaign against then elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti, and I sort of saw that Canada was heavily involved, and I had a little bit of historical background to Haiti at this point, and I was really taken aback by the scope of Canadian involvement, and I basically then spent, and then they would overthrow the elected government, kill thousands of people. Canada had its hands in every facet of this coup. Canadian military invaded, occupied the country. Diplomats, Canadian aid agency, Canadian NGOs, police, on and on, all in differing ways assisted this real naked aggression against the impoverished majority in Haiti. And I basically, from this moment, I had already been heavily involved in student union. I was expelled from the university in aftermath of the Netanyahu protest. I'd been involved in the anti-corporate globalization movement, but I still kind of had this sense of Canada being a benevolent country internationally. And the coup in Haiti really exposed that not be the case. And I spent multiple years opposing Canada's role in Haiti. And then I basically began this big educational political writing project of looking at Canadian foreign policy. That's basically, if Canada was so bad in Haiti, what have they done elsewhere? And I ultimately, 2009, I published the Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy. As I wrote that, I realized the scope of Canadian support for Zionism historically. I realized there was enough material for its own book, which I then published in 2010, Canada and Israel Building Apartheid. And then I then sort of took this to different areas. One on Lester Pearson, a former prime minister, top diplomat for many years. One on Stephen Harper, Canada and Africa. One on the propaganda system in Canadian foreign policy. One on the left and how the left has historically assisted Canadian imperialism. One on the Canadian military. One on Justin Trudeau's foreign policy. The most recent one, co-authored with Owen Schock, Canada's long fight against democracy, that looks at Canada's role in coups. So I've sort of done this pretty deep dive into the history of Canadian foreign policy, and on a research level, on a writing level, and also to a certain extent on an activist level. And I think the thing that over the past few years has probably generated the most attention is my kind of questioning or social media sort of disruptions of politicians, and some of these, it's kind of like a form of activism, journalism that is suited to Twitter, to sort of social media platforms and easy access to video and stuff like that. And I try to ask tough questions of politicians. I see this as all part of like at a macro level, what this is all, both my writing and research, the activism I did with the, be it in the student union, be it with the Canada Haiti Action Network or Haiti Action Montreal, Solidarité Québec Haïti in more recent years, or the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. I see this as kind of like all part of a broader, both ideological, intellectual, and activist kind of effort to expose and oppose Canada's misdeeds globally.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's incredible. Just everything. Like, I mean, we know the stories actually of Concordia, and there's a whole documentary made about that Discordia. And I mean, I don't even know on what they could expel you, but I think that speaks to the fear that they've had around people speaking out about justice in Palestine from way before October 7, from decades ago, and the efforts to silence and suppress. But it's just fascinating also that you took a history course focused on Haiti, and I read on your website you spent multiple years in Haiti, working on the ground with activists, and that's what led you ultimately to really speaking out and researching more on Canada's role abroad in squashing your idea of Canada's benevolence or its peacekeeping image, and honestly opened my eyes so much, your work in terms of Canada's role, whether it's in Africa, in South America, such as Venezuela. So thank you for that. Also, you mentioned the role of your parents, I read, which is that having been activists and passionate about human rights and justice. And I'm sure that has a role in you that would like planted a seed. Yeah, if you would want to speak on that, I guess.
For sure. I mean, my parents both are, they were union activists. They, believed in economic democracy or socialism. They were involved in, international struggles, be it against nuclear weapons, be it against apartheid in South Africa, and obviously today, opposed to Canada's complicity in the Holocaust in Gaza. So no doubt that they're, like I said, for most of my early life, I was focused on like playing hockey. I didn't actually like school very much. But I did engage with the ideas, like, my parents were talking about, my aunt and uncle, both quite active people. My uncles, two of my uncles were the presidents of their local for the Longshoremen Union, so they were they worked on tugboats, but they were very politically involved, and also intellectually involved. My my uncle, who just passed away about a year ago, closest uncle, he was
I'm sorry about that.
yeah, he wrote a couple books about. He basically used his time as a cook on a tugboat to read and write, and was engaged in all kinds of different political activities, and as was his partner. And so, yeah, I was exposed to that for sure, and that's been an important part of shaping my philosophy of the world, understanding that not only that there's lots of injustice in the world. I think there's a lot of people who understand that, but then basically do nothing, right? Unfortunately, and so it's not just a matter of like assessing that there are wrong things in the world. I think most people understand that. It's to say that we have obligation to do what we can, and we're just one individual, of course. So there's not much we can do individually in a big picture sense of shifting these stark power imbalances in our world. But we have a responsibility to do what we can, and everyone obviously has different capacities of what they can do. And also, I think the thing with for me especially, and why this point about Haiti, I think, becomes quite important for me. I should say, I've been to Haiti a couple times, but I didn't spend a long time in Haiti. I spent a long time working in as Haiti solidarity activism in Montreal, heavily with the Haitian community here in Montreal. But I spent multiple years in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007 kind of range, challenging Canadian policy. And I think it was one of the things really important, and I think people know it somewhat intuitively, but they haven't fully wrapped their head around it or politicized it, is that we are like, our political culture and our government is engaged in these assisting these major crimes. Like, obviously what we're seeing in Gaza is the worst of that I've seen in my life. That it's our responsibility. There's a responsibility to do what you can. It's not some like it's just over there. No, it's here. Like, Palestinians are being, they're obviously being killed. That we have responsibility for the crimes the Canadian government, Canadian political culture are assisting, and so the sort of intellectual side of realizing that this benevolent Canada mythology was nonsense, which I realized clearly with the 2004 coup in Haiti. That the kind of the other side to it is that there's ideologies, there's policies that our government is creating or is pursuing, that we're responsible to counter. And I think that it's important that this isn't just sort of abstract, that like now I remember actually what I was saying exactly, but that Palestinians aren't just being killed in Gaza, that the killing is part transpiring here, in the sense that there are policies being pursued by the Canadian government that enable Israel to do that killing, that they would not be able to commit those crimes without assistance, most obviously from the U.S. But if you look at historically, Canada has been, right after the U.S. and U.K., has been a principal ally and benefactor and supporter of Zionism, of the Israeli government, of different institutions in Israel, and so that there's a responsibility now
So I think that, yeah, we have a responsibility. All, individuals, at least adults, have a responsibility to act when they see injustice. We live in a world that's swimming with injustice, so that can be very overwhelming. But that there's, we can do what we can do, not just sort of bemoan that there's wrong things in this world, but actually work to collectively make things better.
Thank you so much. And I think that's so beautiful. I agree that we all need to do our part, and use our skills. Everyone has unique skills to fight injustice. And so next, I want to talk about, well, there's a lot that I want to talk about. We're going to try to focus on certain parts. So you talk about being an agitator, whether it's in hockey or going towards journalism and politically. And you mentioned disrupting politicians in when you introduce yourself, whether it's the prime minister, federal ministers, or opposition leaders. I'd love to ask, why be an agitator and not engage in more quote unquote diplomatic discussions?
Have blood on your hand, Madame Jolie. Madame Jolie, why are you enabling Israel's crimes against Palestinians? You have blood on your hand, Madame Jolie. You went to Israel to support what the massacres, more than 4,000 Palestinian children killed. Madame Jolie, tu devrais avoir honte. Tu as le sang des Palestiniens sur tes mains. Madame Jolie, tu devrais avoir honte. Tu soutiens les massacres palestiniens contre les Palestiniens. Plus que 4 000 enfants morts, Madame Jolie.
Well, my preference on a personal level would be to write an op-ed and submit it to the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and have them publish my considered 700 words on Canada's unique, often illegal assistance to Israel's Holocaust in Gaza. That would be my preference. Would be both at a demeanor level. I like to write, and in terms of the impact, I would get 700 words on the op-ed page of major paper. In the real world, they won't publish that. I've gone through that over 25-year history of writing and activism. I know exactly how the game works, and there is some space within the dominant media, but mostly there isn't. And there's some space on domestic issues. I've had experience with you on domestic issues when I was writing for the president of the Union of Communications Energy Paperwork, 2012, 2013 range. I got all kinds of op-eds into the major papers. But when you start talking about foreign policy, you talk about imperialism. Obviously, Palestine has its own exception. The range of debate and the parameters is very narrow, and so it's so extreme on the Palestine stuff. We did this Disruption Network Canada from 2019, before the pandemic. We couple years of we were disrupting lots of press conferences of ministers, mostly foreign policy issues, and when I talked about Canadian arms sales to Saudi Arabia, corporate media would cover it. You go to a press conference, you interrupt the minister, you start talking about Canadian arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and it actually appeared on the TV. When you do the same thing on Palestine in the past 2 years, it doesn't appear on TV. So even when you are very disruptive and you are, at a press conference and the media is there, you see their cameras, they catch you, they film you, it just still doesn't appear. So I've seen how the media process works on this stuff. And at this point, it's pretty much just, obviously that you can have mass demonstrations every so often. They'll give a bit of coverage. But mostly it's pushed off into the social media world outside of the dominant media outlets. And so going to these events and asking, sometimes it's asking. My preference is to ask the questions. So I actually find that they're remarkably incapable of the most basic responses to questions. Now, when it comes to the prime minister and to a large extent the different ministers, it's I mean, basically the RCMP and the security, know who I am, and it's basically impossible to ask a question, and so you're caught in a position where you can only really sort of make a statement or make a short yell, and then they push you away, or he runs off, or something like that. But the point here is that uh, there's credible injustices going on, and the tactics of agitation, disruption, it's I think absolutely essential in the context of the horrors and the complicity. And I get that there are some people who don't like this. It doesn't look good, maybe, or they feel they're worried that, okay, what's going to happen? Everything's going to spill out of control, and I don't know, everyone's going to be disrupting everyone's speeches all the time, or something like that. There's some sort of liberal-minded people that go in that direction. But let's be honest here. We're talking about like the absolute slaughter and starvation of like millions of people. It's so kind of like inconsequential. I even find there's people who, self-identified supporters of Palestinian rights. Some will claim that, oh, why did you target a woman MP as she was leaving Mark Carney's hotel, and you asked her a question and she hit my camera, and then they complain that this is some sort of I don't know, kind of patriarchal type of demeanor, or sort of undermining women's participation in political life. And it's I'm not saying this is it's always like it's the preferred way. As I've said to the RCMP agents many times, I would prefer to have a couple minutes of Mark Carney's time to just sit down and ask some questions. Mark Carney refuses to do that. Most of these MPs, or basically all the MPs, all the ministers, same thing. They refuse to do that. The dominant media, they don't ask the questions. Let's be clear about this. If you're in the bubble of the acceptable journalists that have the ability to ask the questions, for the most part, they don't ask the really uncomfortable questions. So it's left up to those of us who believe that this is, Canada's engaged in deeply unethical policies. It's up to us to ask the questions. This is only a small bit. I don't see this as just a journalism. I mean, it is a form of journalism, but I see this as part of a broader activism kind of dimension. I just like the people at the Toronto Sun are very clearly activists. They're called commentators, they're called journalists, but they are very clearly activists on behalf of power, on behalf of genocide. I see my work not as some sort of like, I didn't go to journalism school. I don't see it as some sort of like a profession of being a journalist. I am, to the extent that I have a profession, it is as a author, which is slightly different than journalism. But yeah, I think it's important to when you see injustice, when there's injustice taking place, it's important to agitate. It's important to ask the tough questions. It's important to make the powerful uncomfortable. And unfortunately, there's far too little of it happening in our society. We have a serious democratic deficiency, and we need to snap people out of it. We need to wake people up to say, no, it's not acceptable that we are delivering bullets to the Israeli military 20 some months into a Holocaust. I mean, that's not even close to acceptable. Who in their right minds would think that's even close to acceptable? And these politicians lie to our face about it. And so, yes, we have to get up close to them and make them uncomfortable, and also embarrass them in the public sphere.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, on leading, like talking about also that you didn't go to journalistic school, but you have so much. Like I look at Gaza and the journalists that are getting murdered for speaking truth to power and covering stories and daring to, seek justice for the oppressed, and to put themselves in uncomfortable positions to cover truth and to ask questions that need to be asked, which unfortunately, as you said, most journalists are not doing. And you mentioned, I can't remember the specific term related to democracy, but that people don't use, like, that is supposed to be democracy, being able to confront, to ask questions, and in the end, to agitate, and that there's not enough of it. So, leading on from there, what advice would you give to aspiring journalists? I've heard that it's like a it's not dying industry. What advice would you give to aspiring journalists in an era where Western media is very anti-Palestinian, Zionist? They want to cover stories truthfully, but it's difficult to earn or to find a career in this path. And where would you recommend they start? And what makes a good journalist? It's a lot. So whatever you feel comfortable with here.
But I'm the beneficiary of the corporate media in the sense that my father, around when I was 7 or 8, he went back to school. He did a number of odd kind of jobs, working class jobs. He went back to school in Vancouver, got a journalism certificate, and got a job at the Vancouver Sun. And kind of at the height of journalists, when they were quite well paid, they'd had a union for many decades. It was a very profitable industry, and so he was a journalist at the Vancouver Sun, and so he's seen it completely from the inside of how the structure, and it's complicated. It's not. There are lots of good people, or certainly there were. I think less and less. Those newsrooms are getting smaller and smaller, and the political parameters are even more intense. But there's lots of good people in those jobs, but they're very constrained, and my first advice would be do not do it. Choose a different profession. It certainly do not imagine being anywhere near truthful and being paid by these either the Post Medias of the world or the CBCs of the world. I mean, that's just not on the agenda. My dad, he was a reporter in the sports section for a long time because it's it's quite apolitical, right? I mean, it's not in a big picture level, but in a sense, it's obviously less politically sensitive. And so the I think that to the extent that people are thinking about getting involved in journalism, I see it as more an extension of my activism, and this goes right to my first writing for the student paper at Concordia. It was like they had expelled elected student officials before I was expelled. 2 years before that, they expelled 2 officials. One, Laith Marouf, people are probably familiar with him. Tom Kiefer was the other, and I wrote a whole bunch as part of my anger and build pressure on the administration for doing that, and so like my writing as a student union paper was literally just an extension of some of the activism I was doing on student related issues, corporate globalization issues, and so that's how I would see things. So if people are thinking about considering how to pursue this stuff, but also having an income, which obviously people have to have, I would suggest that it makes more sense to, get a job that maybe pays you fairly well, or if you can, of course, or that has flexible hours, or don't have to work a full 40 hours, and then do some writing and activism on the side, rather than thinking that this was a way to actually make a living. It's just, it's always been difficult. Maybe there was a couple decades there in the late 90s, maybe, where there was the corporate media had, it was such a profitable industry, and they had these big newsrooms, and they would hire one or two kind of lefty columnists or something like that. Maybe there was some time, I'm not even sure that ever existed, but that certainly does not exist today in a media environment, particularly in the print media, that is completely it's, the newsrooms have completely shrunk, and the political pressures are just off the charts. Now, the other part, or maybe the more upside positive side of things, is there is now a model of getting donations and having basically supporters, paying $5, $10 a month, $20 a month, and developing a kind of a couple hundred supporters, sustainers that allow budding or even established commentators, journalists to very rarely make a good living, but make enough of a living to get by. I think that's something that the technology has enabled, and that's something worth considering seriously. Obviously, there's lots of podcasters doing that. There's even some of the mega corporations, even YouTube. As much as they are a mega corporation, there is some room to monetize some of this stuff if you get lucky, if you have sort of a successful podcast or successful kind of channel, and in terms of covering news and stuff. So there is some possibilities there, but as a general rule, I think we do not be naive to think that the rich and powerful that own most of the media outlets that pay journalists don't believe that they are going to pay you to tell the truth or to challenge power.
Okay, so moving on. Recently, you announced your intention, or that you are running in the NDP leadership race, and that will be happening in March of 2026. Why is this vote, in your opinion, important? And what made you decide to run to be leader of the NDP? And what are your goals in running?
Yeah, I didn't have leading the NDP as on my radar at all until I was asked by the Socialist Caucus of the NDP if I would be their candidate, or if they wanted to nominate me or support my bid. And I initially just sort of kind of shrugged it off. Barry Weisletter from the Socialist Caucus, who I've known for a long time, called me up, and I said, no, but I'll call you back with like a confirmed no in a week or so. And I actually didn't call him back. I thought about it a little bit, and then I mostly just kind of forgot about it, to be honest with you. And then he called back, and I said, I didn't give the confirm whatever. And then I thought about it a bit more, and basically my reason for running was two political issues that I think I'm well placed. Both the Holocaust in Gaza and Canada's complicity there, and I obviously have written about and understand the scope of Canada's complicity, as well as anyone, and so that's what I've been spending most of my political activity on over the past 20 some odd months, and but the other issue that was kind of building up that in some ways would be more important to prodding me to decide to run was and I should say on Palestine, the NDP has gotten far better. Like they're not an obstacle now. They're not doing enough. They're still too cautious. But they at least are using the word genocide. They're at least saying Canada should stop arms sales. They're not on the other side. They're not on the wrong side. They have conceded far too much to the anti-Palestinian forces in this country. But on the other issue that kind of prompted me to decide to run, the radical militarist turn of Mark Carney, which included right around the time of me considering running, this huge increase, $9 billion of new military spending this year, and they're like desperately, how do we throw this money out the door before April? Because they wanted to announce 2% of GDP on the military before the NATO conference there back in June. And then at the conference, at the NATO summit, they agreed to 5% spending on defense, military, which is just a stunning increase. That would put up to $150 billion a year. That would add $100 billion in spending on the military over the next 9 years. And the reality is the NDP has basically supported Canadian foreign policy, which is really Washington's foreign policy, on China, on Iran, on Russia, on the NATO proxy war, even, quite frankly, even on places like Haiti, where they haven't really demonized the leaders like they have, Russia, Iran, and China, where there's a much greater demonization campaign. The NDP is basically supports Canadian foreign policy, U.S. Foreign policy, unless there's a big social movement challenging it. So on Palestine, they have shifted because there's been tons of activism, probably the biggest popular uprising against Canada's complicity in international crimes ever, the activism of the past 22 months. And so this military spending increase is not, it's increasingly coming at the expense of social programs, and it's becoming obvious. And you're starting to see some of the unions, some of the social democratic groups like the Council of Canadians, who've been very quiet on militarism in recent years, starting to come out and criticize the boost in military spending because it's so obviously going to come at the expense of social programs, of layoffs in the federal workforce, etc. And so I see a situation where having a voice that is capable, is knowledgeable, and willing to challenge Canadian militarism, and for me, the best case scenario here is that it's just cuts to social programs and it's cuts to social entitlements. The worst case is that we see that these monsters who've been enabling this Holocaust in Gaza, they're given a whole bunch more capacity to intimidate and to wage violence internationally. That's the likely scenario. This huge increase in military spending likely is going to lead to Canada being engaged in more U.S.-led, belligerent military endeavors. So having someone in the NDP leadership race, or if I was to win, as the leader of the NDP, challenging this militarist turn in a coherent and principled and knowledgeable way, I think would be it matters. And so the NDP, like I said, again, they've been, Heather McPherson, the candidate of the establishment, she sits on the NATO Parliamentary Association. She celebrates the Canadian military. She's totally on board as foreign critic. She's been okay in the last 16 months on Palestine, but she's just totally on board with the NATO proxy war. She's totally on board with demonizing China. She has been total hawk on Iran. she shifted a little bit when Israel attacked and the U.S. Trump attacked 6 weeks ago. So having that kind of voice, I think, is important, and I think there's possibilities too, right? When it comes to this Palestine outreach strategy that we have. We have people leafleting many Palestine events in the last couple of weeks. We have this leaflet that is for the leadership campaign, but it's also a deepening consciousness of Canadian complicity, and we call for getting rid of Canada's anti-Palestinian terrorism list. We call for prosecuting Canadians fighting the Israeli military. We call for applying the Foreign Enlistment Act to institutions in this country, inducing Canadians to join the Israeli military. We're calling for some points that are just not being raised outside of sort of the far the more radical ends, or the far ends of the Palestine solidarity movement that haven't really been raised by any politicians. And so there's a it's unlikely, but there is a possibility that there's enough people out there who want somebody willing to stand up. All the smears coming, all the attacks are already coming, that are willing to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to cower to this genocidal Jewish supremacist lobby organizations as they're backing the elimination, the eradication, the slaughter of everyone in Gaza, let alone what they're doing in the West Bank, let alone what they've done in Lebanon, etc. And so, that's kind of what's prodded me to run. And within this, kind of interestingly for me, is that I've been focused mostly on Palestine, Canada complicity in Palestine, and other foreign policy issues in recent years. But I've actually, in doing this campaign, getting going, I've kind of gone back to some of my previous writing and activism on bigger questions like economic democracy, capitalism, degrowth, and the like. And so, in a weird sort of way, in joining this race, it's kind of weirdly, I don't know, you could call it radicalized me, or brought much more broad political positions out. Positions I've long held, but I've been, I haven't really articulated. Maybe I'll go to, some demonstrations or whatever, but I haven't really sort of written much about or articulated much in recent years.
Thank you. And also, you mentioned the pressures that you've already been receiving, and I wanted to touch on that. So first, I want to talk about how the NDP lists. They said there's going to be a full set of rules that are going to still be finalized, but they list 3 main points on their website so far in terms of rules so far for the candidates leadership race. First, it says the NDP leadership race will officially begin in September 2025, so next month, with the new leader to be elected no later than March 29, 2026. And then the next point talks about the entry fee, which is a substantial fee, and to demonstrate candidates' funding capacity. And then it says strong regulations will govern the role of third parties in the race in light of troubling allegations and credible information about foreign interference in the past. I wonder, and I raise these points because I wanted to ask if you're worried of efforts to throw you out of the race, for instance, by the party itself, not even allowing you to reach the point where members get to choose who they want to lead them. For instance, not to compare you to Patrick Brown, but I think of Patrick Brown being prevented from even reaching the voting point in the federal conservative leadership race after allegations of him having violated financial rules, which he fully denied. And then also, I want to say there have been serious efforts by Zionists, including by FBI-listed terror leader Meir Weinstein, who's currently a leader of Israel Now, or quote unquote journalist, you mentioned activist Brian Lilly for the Toronto Sun, Zionist star journalist for them, trying to push the NDP to prevent you from being able to run in the leadership race. So do you believe that their attempts of these Zionists bear any fruit to potentially prevent you from being able to reach the point of the NDP leadership vote? And what would it show the NDP support base if the NDP listens to an FBI listed terror leader or to Zionists by not allowing NDP supporters to choose who they want to lead the party? And leading on to that, what kind of other pushback have you received, but also what kind of support have you received? You mentioned the Socialist Caucus within the NDP, but if there's any other support that you have received.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Israeli consul here in Montreal has already pronounced himself, Paul Hurchison, on X. He responded to a thing I posted about if you want to freak out the Israel lobby, support Engler's campaign or something like that, a meme that I posted, and he responded and basically said, I hope the NDP lets him run, so it proves how inconsequential his ideas are, or something like that. And it's kind of fascinating to see some of these Zionists, like the mayor of Jeremy Levy of Hampstead, who one day he says, "Oh, I'm so happy to hear Yves running. It's going to destroy the NDP," and the next day he's retweeting people saying that the NDP has to ban Engler's candidacy and stuff like that. So they're a little bit all over the place. They're trying to ridicule it. That's obviously foreign interference. If it was the Chinese consul that had said that about a Conservative Party race, I guarantee you the media would have picked up about it and framed it as foreign interference. But I also had a whole campaign. They decided to go at me for being a Rwanda genocide denier, and they cited an article from 2017. And there was this whole ex-bot on Twitter that got this community note that tried to suggest that I was a Rwanda genocide denier. And I can't prove it, but it came across as it was very coordinated, all asking X to have a community note. A very bizarre community note was placed. And I'd say at least 90% these were bots that were somehow aligned to one of the different Israeli government campaigns on that front. B'nai B'rith then came out with a statement. They tried to get some Rwandan organizations to sign it that basically said I was a Rwanda genocide denier. And there's been, across the board of different politicians and different figures who've come out and said that the NDP should ban my candidacy before the campaign's formally even begun. Now there's been a new one, a new kind of smear campaign that's coming from a certain segment of the left. Some people have raised the notion that the NDP wants to exclude me from the race, and they want to the fundraising target of $100,000 plus 25% of everything else the candidates raise is designed to, the party is in dire financial position, so they do need to raise money, so that they have some reason. But it was $30,000 in the last leadership race, and the leadership race before that, and it was $15,000. So they've significantly increased the sum that's needed to participate in the race, and that's designed to keep kind of more working class or left wing kind of candidates out, to narrow the parameters of debate, I think, very clearly. But as you alluded to, they also have this whole vetting process that gives some officials the basic power to just decide that your values don't align with the party's values and just won't let you participate. And that my strong suspicion is that that's the desire of the people who kind of run the NDP is to do that. They want to find a reason for doing that. They don't want, I think this is important, they don't want to be perceived to having done that amidst the Holocaust in Gaza. They don't want to be perceived as doing that on behalf of the, Brian Lillys of the Toronto Sun, or the Jeremy Levy's, the mayor of Hampstead's, or the more sort of right-wing Zionist forces. Some people have suggested this latest kind of left attack against me. Some people have raised the possibility that it's laying the groundwork for the NDP to vet me out, but they would prefer to have sort of a bit of cover from a more kind of leftward realms of the political spectrum. I have absolutely no idea if that's true or not. It's always hard to know what's people's honest, held views, and what's part of bigger kind of I don't know, nasty tricks, if you like. But yeah, so there's been a lot of hostility, but there's also been a whole lot of support. We have more than 650 volunteers signed up. We have 6 or 7 different committees. A policy committee where there's like 40 people having 2-hour long discussions, and then broken into 6 different subcommittees drafting policy on all kinds of different areas of social affairs. We have, a fundraising committee that's people have made pledges that are going to set us on the path to covering certainly the first $25,000 installment of the $100,000 and some. We have, people, like I said, leafleting at different anti-genocide events across the country. We have a whole, we have about 5 or 6 cities now where we have a coordinator, and then we have lots of people just doing it solo. And so, we things are moving. I'm taken aback by how much interest and support there is. But the attacks are real. The attacks are only going to pick up if we get going. It's not just the sort of Zionist lobby attacks, but also the other people planning on running. Right? They haven't announced themselves. We know who the likely people are: Heather McPherson, Avi Lewis, Leah Gazan. Those are the names that have been raised. It's pretty clear that Heather McPherson is running. And so there's the supporters of the different candidates, presumably, but then also if we get going in a serious way, there's no doubt that it's not, like the Canadian military is not, I guarantee you, is not a fan of my work calling for us to reduce military spending. There's a lot of different powerful forces that don't at all like the stuff I'm saying about economic democracy, capitalism, and so yeah, there's been backlash. I presume if we get traction, that backlash is just going to ramp up to a much greater level.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned also before Heather McPherson. I wanted to touch. You say that her stance on Palestine has been okay. That has only come more recently, because when my sister Rada and I, with a group of activists, went to disrupt Jagmeet Singh at the NDP convention, um, right after October 7 in 2023, for having made a statement more sympathetic to Zionists. Um, Heather McPherson, when the NDP stripped the passes of NDP members who came to support us in protesting the NDP's Zionist stance, she spoke condemning the NDP members and activists who were protesting the NDP leadership for its Zionist stance. But now that it's popular, she's wearing her watermelon pin every day and speaking in press conferences. But it's clearly very performative, because from the start, she would be very outspoken about Ukraine because she represents a population, a center in Edmonton with a high population of Ukrainians. But when it came to Palestinians, again, she only spoke when it became popular for her as the foreign affairs critic, speaking in opposition to the very Zionist leaders in parliament. So I just want to make this distinction clear, especially if she's running in the leadership race, that she has not been supporting Palestinians and opposing Zionists from the beginning. This has only become a point for her now that it's popular. Whereas you have been in this from decades ago and expelled, Concordia and all of this for your longstanding support and advocacy for justice for everyone, including Palestinians. I just want to make that distinction. And moving on, what can be said about those who have lost hope in the NDP and in electoral politics? And do you see any hope in electoral politics in a settler colony? And I'm just going to merge this. One of my followers, I asked if they have questions for you. And one of them said, do you feel, in their words, that you are selling out by running for NDP leadership? So again, just focusing, my question is, what can you say to those who have lost hope in the NDP and in electoral politics? And what do you hope to see in the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the selling out question is a completely legitimate question and I think an important question to ask anyone getting involved in this very murky world of electoral politics or in this case specifically the leadership of the NDP. And I have to say, there is pressures to there's people who are assisting who are completely well-meaning, around like sort of message discipline and trying to stick to specific issues that you want to keep raising. And this is not stuff that aligns with my what I've been doing in recent years, and I do the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, where it's the complete opposite. I mean, it's on foreign policy, but it's like wide ranging, and I take questions like all over the map, from Canada's role in Congo, Rwanda, to Palestine, to militarism, to China. A lot of the issues would be viewed as quite sensitive or controversial in official politics, and I try to answer the best I'm equipped to answer, and when I don't know anything, I say that. So the notion of sort of getting into just, okay, well, you're just going to speak about, the housing crisis, you're going to just speak about the tar sands, you're just going to speak about, economic democracy. I don't know, should I narrow? And Joshua, je suis so it makes total sense. But for me, what's kind of odd, and I kind of alluded to this, I mentioned this previously, in doing this, I've actually, in a sense, become broader in my politics, what could be described as more radical, in talking about other issues like land back, like economic democracy, like degrowth, because I'm kind of pigeonholed into, okay, well, you're just on the Palestine, on the militarism, and obviously a leader of the NDP is going to be much broader. You have to have a position on all the different domestic, international, whatever policies. So it's forced me to go back and look at, like I said, things I've written, things I've thought about over the years. So it is a real consideration. One point, first of all, I want to thank you for raising the thing about Heather McPherson, because I remember seeing the action that you took at the NDP convention, and that they were like physically threw you out of the hotel and stuff like that. I didn't remember, or maybe I never knew, that Heather McPherson explicitly joined in on this dirty dealings that were done. Doesn't surprise me. It fits exactly with her outlook on all kinds of different issues. Now, so can you just repeat the specific part of your question?
Yeah, specifically, it was what can be said about those who've lost hope in the NDP in electoral politics, and do you see hope in electoral politics in a settler colony?
I mean, obviously, the structures. I mean, look at what just happened in BC. You have an NDP government that's saying it's it's even done as UNDRIP, United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous peoples. But then it's immediately, there was a recent court decision that questioned some of the property, private property rights, and basically saying that Indigenous dispossession can't just be put aside to fee simple property ownership. Basically saying that Indigenous people, have had their land stolen, and you can't just sort of say, well, okay, their land stolen, but now we're 150 years later and we're just going to ignore that and go with the current property relations. That's all the judge's decision seems to be, and the NDP is immediately contesting this decision, which I haven't read the whole thing. I've just read a few articles about it, but it seems like a completely reasonable legal ruling from a BC, I think the Superior Court of BC judge, and so this is a pretty minimalist challenge to colonial dispossession that this NDP government's not even willing to say, hey, this is we should. And the judge even gave them like 18 months to negotiate a solution to so individuals aren't harmed or whatever, right? Judge even in the decision gave the government sort of an out to come up with some sort of process that can have some minimal amount of justice, and still they're just going to continue it along the legal. This is a long-standing tradition in BC of defying Indigenous rights by putting it into the court system and deferring to decades later by legal process. So yeah, I mean that's I think a very concrete example of the fact that to get justice in a colonized land is through the political judicial apparatus is a murky endeavor. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm not. I obviously believe that social movements are the drivers of change, and that it's absolutely impossible to fundamentally change power structures without mass mobilization, mass organization, mass activism. But I also do believe that the governments can change. There are differences within governments. They are less bad. Mostly, it's just a question of how bad they are, not that they're good. But so I think there is some parameters to that. Now, in this specific case, what I'm trying to do, the success that I think is reasonable to achieve, is impacting the parameters of the debate within the NDP leadership race. I think that we've already done that even before the race has started. I think we've pushed where this debate was going to be to the left. If we are able to actually get past the vetting, we will have an even greater impact on that. It's obviously, this is a collective affair, and it's for everyone who assists in this campaign that is going to be doing that. So I think that's happened. That's doable. It's still a long shot, of course, to win the race. If we did win the race, if it was possible, if I did become leader of the NDP, I think that there is a possibility. I mean, you'd have a backlash that would be ferocious, of course. But I think that there are, like like Heather McPherson, she has become vocal on Palestine, in a very narrow sense, as part of the fact that it's just in the interests of her and of the NDP, because there's been so much activism, and so they're following the wave, they're riding the wave, if you like, and but I think there's all kinds of ways. I think there clearly, if you had even not even somebody who was not even someone with my politics, but say someone more like a Libby Davies or a Sven Robinson or some of the more, even like a Matthew Green, with whatever things you want to say about Matthew Green. If you had a Matthew Green as the leader instead of Jagmeet Singh, I think there was interventions that could have made life a lot more difficult for Justin Trudeau in enabling this Holocaust in Gaza. And there's and certainly if I was in that position, I mean you'd be bold, you get arrested, you do things that really work to draw attention, to rally support. I mean, they didn't even go to demonstrations. Jagmeet had never been to a demonstration against these horrors over the past 22 months. I heard Heather McPherson. I wrote that I'd never heard. I couldn't find any public information about her going to demo. When I wrote that, people did say that she'd come to a couple rallies in Edmonton or in Calgary, but it doesn't seem she announced it. I don't know if she even spoke. I think she just sort of attended.
Jagmeet condemned the demonstration, just to add. Like, for example, the one walking on University Avenue in Toronto, he perpetuated the lies that they're protesting a Jewish hospital when they're just walking towards Queen's Park.
Yeah, well, he almost certainly he didn't attend any demos, and I think he condemned. It's not just that one. Jagmeet, I think, condemned. I at one point actually kind of looked into his Twitter on this. It's a half dozen or more that at different times where he's essentially condemned those who were opposing the Holocaust in Gaza. So as a political party, the NDP officialdom, there's a few MPs that have gone to a few demos. Probably in total, it's like 10 over the past 22 months. And almost certainly, I mean, they condemned the rally. I just wrote about this. Even Leah Gazan, back in January 2024 at Melanie Joly's house. Leah Gazan condemned it. Heather McPherson condemned it. At that time, I said Heather McPherson used the word appalled. She was appalled by this rally by anti-genocide activists at Joly's house. She hadn't, as far as I knew at the time, she hadn't ever used the word appalled for what Israel was doing in Gaza. And it's just like, that level of complicity is I actually forgotten about how bad they were early on. Yeah, there's a whole history. And then you go back in the history. I mean, I was involved in the 2021 NDP convention, the lead up to the convention, where they were trying to, they had blocked like 6 different conventions for over 15 years or so. Previous conventions, they always tried to subvert the Palestine resolution or some resolution about Palestine. The one in 2018, Jagmeet Singh got his family members and all to organize to block it from even being allowed to be voted on. And then in 2021, there was a huge campaign. We, Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, we organized online webinar beforehand as part of this whole pressure campaign. And it was in part because Jagmeet had done this such embarrassing interview with CBC where he was asked about these resolutions in Palestine, and he just started talking about his concern for Jewish Canadians. And then the CBC reporter kind of is confused and asks the question again, and Jagmeet just responds by saying, we've got to really combat anti-Semitism. And it was just like so deeply anti-Palestinian that it elicited this big backlash that he actually apologizes for later that night on X. And that happens just before the convention, so it kind of put the party establishment on the back foot. So their ability to suppress another Palestine resolution, which they were planning, I almost guarantee they were planning on doing, was made more difficult because people were so agitated already. And so once members had a chance, it was not a great resolution even, but once members had a chance, it passed. So big picture, getting back to the question of should people be disillusioned by electoral politics and/or the NDP? Yes, they should be. I think would be the simple answer. Now, within that, is there the ability to have some either less bad policies or actual improvements in people's lives? I think there is also. I don't think anyone who is engaged in social movement activism should stop any of that. If people have a little bit of time on the side to assist my campaign, that would be great. As an add-on, I see this campaign and if so happens to become the leader and this whole process more generally as trying to boost social movement activism and boost the NDP's role or presence in social movement activism. They're not at all or basically at all engaged in that right now. There are, I think, electoral associations that do have people that want to be more activist oriented, and they for the most part don't get any support, and often I think get hostility from above when they try that. I think that political parties, as much as there's problems, I think that there is change that can happen through that mechanism, and so some form of engagement, whether it's passive critical support or passive critical engagement, I think is in some way it is ultimately essential to some degree.
Okay, thank you for that. And we're approaching the end, but I want to ask, I mean, you mentioned that you are looking for support in the race. And so, well, first, I'd like to ask if you've taken any notes from Dimitri Lascaris' race, his efforts in the Green Party, and if you've reached out to him for any support or advice, and how we can support you in the race as well. Whoever wants to get involved or what people can do.
Yeah, well, first of all, Dimitri, of course, is a friend of mine, and he is supporting the campaign. He's actually the legal counsel, one of the lawyers we have, in case the NDP tries tries to exclude us, and we were going to mount a legal response to that. And so Dimitri, of course, was successful. The Green Party kicked him out, and he was able to overturn that. And so that's part of the reason we want his support in that, in case that happens with the NDP. So yeah, and in terms of what people can do to support, the first thing is checking out the website, vote or Yves for NDP-leader.ca, Yves for NDP-leader.ca. And there's a sign-up thing for people who want to volunteer, and there's the different groups the different committees that are organized. And then there's also another volunteer list if you just want information on the campaign, not to be actively involved. And so people can do that. There's also, as I mentioned, is the Palestine strategy. We have this leaflet. Thousands of these leaflets have circulated, mostly focused on events against genocide, because it's, we have two different leaflets, one general leaflet but one Palestine specific leaflet that goes further in terms of what we're demanding of the federal government. And so people, if you're going to different events in your community, print them off. We have different fonts based upon printing them at home versus private photocopy place, and less toner use and stuff like that. And so if you're into that, bring them, hand them out. And yeah, so just be engaged. We do want people to become NDP members. I understand there are people who are uncomfortable with that. If you can go on the site, it's only $5. If you're underemployed, you can check off, and it's only $5, so it's not a huge financial commitment. I understand there's some people who are reticent about that. That's completely understandable. To become an official candidate, we need 500 members to nominate. And there's all this criteria based upon regional, based upon equity, based upon age, that go into this criteria. So effectively, you need a fair bit more than 500 people. And so that's one of the bars that we are trying to reach. And so obviously having more people become members makes that easier. Ultimately, when the race gets going, the only way to succeed would be to bring in 20,000 new members, and but that's that's a 6 month process. I know there are dozens, probably hundreds, that have already signed up as part of or influenced by our campaign. But ultimately, we would have to get into the thousands and I think just to really impact the race, even we would need thousands of people to become members. But to win the race, we would need 10 plus, probably towards 20,000. And so check out the website. Obviously, share. We have all kinds of memes and stuff like that. We have a whole toolkit that people can just take action on their own. And I guess you can follow me on the different social media outlets and whatnot.
And I'll make sure to share the website, your social media outlets. If people don't already follow, they should all be following. But and I just want to and it's also amazing to hear. You reminded me that Dimitri was kicked out and he fought that and got back in. And so it's incredible that, you get to have that experience on your team and that support. Um, and you have an incredible team and support, it seems, and hopefully that continues to grow as more people come to support this crucial race, send a strong message that you know there is a need for this kind of leadership, especially in the ongoing Holocaust in Gaza. And here also, in on Turtle Island, the need to decolonize and policies. I know you talk about economic democracy versus capitalist tyranny, and uh, I I don't know if you want to briefly elaborate. I know we're limited in time, but in what you mean by economic democracy, and also how you would increase NDP support federally as leader.
Well, the economic democracy is simply capitalism is based upon $1, one vote, and shareholders literally have for each share you have one more vote, and that's based upon how much wealth you have. And so you can't call your system a democracy if it's only happening in the electoral or political sphere, because of course the control of the economy has so much spillover in terms of control of the media, in terms of control over political affairs and whatnot. But concretely, we're talking about bringing democracy to wherever there is social labor. And most of our economy is run on social labor, where it's in big firms, you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of people all operating socially, conducting the day-to-day work in that way, but the ownership is basically one person or a handful of wealthy people who control what those people make and decide what gets made and stuff like that. So that's the sort of simple. It's one person, one vote versus $1, one vote. Now it's not so easy in terms of turning that into practical reality. And you want to do that in a way that's not too damaging to people's lives, because of course capitalists are very powerful and they can make the economy scream, and they can destabilize economic and political life if they feel threatened, and so you have to do it. The ideal way to do it is with steady reforms that strengthen working class people's consciousness, organizational structure, that make better position to actually run the economy, but I think that the ideal has to be stated quite clearly, because I think it's just clear cut that capitalism just leads to bigger economic inequality. I mean, we get these people who have tens of billions of dollars, and then we have people on the streets, and then we have people who the real immiseration, and it's getting worse in terms of the unhoused crisis in Canada. And then it destabilizes our psyche, right? It's an attack against like buy more, buy this if you're gonna be happy if you have that and this, and it's just this constant kind of assault against our psyche. And then if you look at the ecological front, and this recent plastic summit, I mean, this is something. Plastics are just completely devastating to human health, to the ocean, and a whole lot of the ecology. And they basically didn't exist 40 or 50 years ago. And we just were tied to this corporate capitalist throwaway culture that just leads to this expansion. And if you look at almost all of the ecological indicators, we are just absolutely going down a path of serious danger for long-term survival of human civilization. And so capitalism needs to be replaced. It needs to be, there's some form of call it eco-socialism, call it economic democracy, but the basic principles are the same, which is that the power of capitalists, this notion that a small few can own the whole economy and we can call ourselves a democracy, that has to be completely obliterated, and that those who work in places need to have significant control. How the ownership structure should be different in all, different sizes of firms and different industries, but there has to be worker control or influence over direct and formal control or influence, whether they're part of the actual ownership structures with local communities. That I think should vary depending on the industry. So that's the sort of big picture level of economic democracy. And then in terms of the NDP, support, I think the attacks are going to be ruthless against me if I so happen to win the leadership, even get close to it. But I also think that there's, like I said this, someone asked about the values of, do you think Canadians hold your values? And I think Canadians hold my values more than they hold Mark Carney's values. I mean, this guy's like works for a $1 trillion asset management company, and his just this he operates in this exceedingly wealthy corporate kind of world that the vast majority of the public don't have anything to do with. Do most Canadians hold my opinions about Canada's role internationally? Of course not. Of course not. Are most Canadians sympathetic to things like ending arms trade, to the genocide in Gaza? They are, even despite the media bias against that. They actually are. Are most Canadians sympathetic to notion of like the basic moral principle of do unto others as you would want to be done unto yourself? Well, that's a really anti-imperialist moral principle, right? I think most people believe in that moral principle, and that's quite an anti-imperialist moral principle. Now, do people understand it exactly in that way? Of course not. Is it possible to educate and raise consciousness of people? Are people open to some of that stuff? I think they're much more open than the dominant media and the dominant political structures would have us believe. Is any of this easy? Of course not. Is it necessary? I think it is. How we go about it, I think there's lots of different strategies. Running to be the leader of the NDP is just one strategy within a much broader possibilities and things that people can and should be working on.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Um, I guess I think we're approaching the end. I want to ask, is there anything else that you would like to add or mention?
No.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to be looking at how I can directly support you, especially in getting more support for your leadership candidacy and in the race in the Palestinian Muslim community. I think also, even in terms of the values and principles in Islam, in terms of speaking and taking action for justice, you embody so much of the values and principles that we are taught that we are supposed to be upholding. And so we need to be really, you know, supporting you in this race, and hopefully that's going to be a big part on us to try to get that support, and each, group of people in their communities to get support for you in this race. And hopefully we get to discuss more. There were more questions that people wanted me to ask you, and I'm so sorry that I didn't get to ask, but hopefully there will be more opportunities. And yeah, I thank you so much for your time, your efforts, and everything that you've been doing for Palestine and all other causes, every day and every year for so many years. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on.